Thank you for coming into our first pop-up talk as part of our education speaker series. We, a few years ago, had our sights on starting a program in Cyprus because we found that we think that there would be a need for our programs on the island and for empowering the young people to be leaders of their community. We confirmed that belief even more so after we met Eleni and our good friend Christine, who she kind of talked to some of you about how she was connected with us. But Christine has a great experience on the island. We met with her and we realized that we were correct and that our programs would be a good fit. So we brought over a group of 6 Cypriots last year who were here to study our programs and also kind of create a plan on how to bring our programs to the island. So they're in the process of recruiting a partner. We've started applying for funding, and our goal is that next year we'll bring our first team of Turkish and Greek Cypriots to our center in Northern Ireland, where they'll have our first year program. The year after, they'll come here to the States. In the third year, they'll either go to Israel or our site in Belize. So as part of us branching into this new region of the world, we wanted a chance for our family to hear about Cyprus and from the Cypriot herself and learn a little bit more about the situation. So you weren't here to come hear me, so I'm here to Eleni, welcome.
Thank you for having me. It's always a pleasure to talk about home while I'm away from home. And to give people an insight on what my life has been like and the way I was raised. I will start a little bit about talking about the history of the island. I will move to the propaganda that exists today, and I will talk a little bit about my story through that, and then what I see the future to be like and why Friends Forever is part of that. Just a simple map so that we get an idea of where Cyprus is, because it has a very strategic location. The island is between 3 continents, Europe, Asia, and Africa, and many countries want it. It's a good location to be controlling resources, to be controlling populations in the area, and to have military bases for needs. You might notice that the island is divided by this red line. That red line is called the Green Line. It was created by the British colony master of the time in the 1950s, and the whole idea was that at one point they would divide the population so that parts of it would live in the north and parts of it would live in the south. That line still exists today. It's called the buffer zone, and the UN controls it. In the south, that's where mainly Greek Cypriots live, and in the north is where mainly Turkish Cypriots live, and I will explain those terms in a little while, but having an idea of the map will make it easier to understand what I'm talking about. These 2 little green spots is where Britain has independent military bases, and they're considered the UK. So they're not part of Cyprus whatsoever. And that happened after a deal that I will talk about in a moment. So I wanted to show you a little bit to understand how rule in Cyprus existed. We were always colonized. People were never free. So the idea of freedom and having a democracy was just so distant. It wasn't something people knew or understood. The first time we were properly conquered was in 1400s BC, and that was the first colonization of the island. That was the first time that Greek culture and the whole Greek values moved to the island, and those sort of stayed together through the centuries. Then we were affected by the Assyrians, Egyptians, Persians, and so on, but the main ones that we're going to focus on is the Ottoman Turk rule and the British occupation. This time right here was really rough for Cypriots. A lot of people died and they were killed. Although they were ruled by Christian colonizers, like the Venetians and the Lusignans, they did not allow them to have their Orthodox churches. They did not allow them to speak their language. They did not allow them to have their culture. So people felt really, really oppressed. We had diverse mixes of people because of the way we were colonized for so long. And then we had a relief. The Ottomans ruled us. We would assume that the Ottomans were carrying in Islam, which is a different religion, and that people would feel oppressed, but that was not the case. What happened was that the Ottomans allowed people to have their religion. They allowed them to have their celebrations and to have their marriages the way they liked to, and to have education for their kids the way they wanted to. Again, talking about a very small tier of people that were richer and could afford that. But they allowed things to run the way they should, and they allowed people to farm, which was their main way for providing for their families. And that's why nobody really rebelled against them. And it was a good time. for the Cypriots. That will be a very important fact as we move on further. In 1878, Turkey and Russia were fighting to control trade around the Black Sea. So the Ottomans received help from the British, and then they said, since you helped us, we will gift you Cyprus. So here you go. The last time we were gifted was by one of the boyfriends of Cleopatra. He had gifted us to her. So we get gifted easily. So if you don't know what to get your friends for like their next birthday, think about Cyprus. You know, like, oh, here you go, here's an island. So that's when British occupation began. You know that the British usually have this tactic called divide and rule, and that's exactly what they started doing. The Cypriots were together, they farmed together, they lived together in peace for so many years. To an extent, they were again ruled, and being part of a colony is difficult, but they needed to find a way. They needed to find two different categories of people in order to divide them. And that's when they created the identities of Turkish Cypriot and Greek Cypriot. The idea was that people were not the same. It was the idea that some people, since they spoke Turkish, they would be more linked to Turkey, and then people that spoke Greek would be more linked to Greece. So they should both work to unite with their countries. So the Greek Cypriots fighting to unite with Greece, and the Turkish Cypriots fighting to unite with Turkey. They forced populations to live in separate villages. They forced children to go into separate schools. They created propaganda so that you would feel more Greek and more Turkish, so that when it would come to the time when the Brits would do what they wanted to on the island, you wouldn't really see it, because you were fighting in between you about whether you should join Turkey or whether you should join Greece. In 1955, people had enough. So they said, let's join with Greece, because the majority of the population was Greek Cypriot. And the Turkish Cypriots at the time just did not want to be ruled by the British anymore, because they also felt oppressed, so they said, at least we'll be independent to an extent. So they helped fight a war to be united with Greece. That lasted for around 4 years. And the British said, all right, we will give you your independence. And that was in 1960. What happened is that Britain, Greece, and Turkey came together and they signed their constitution, they created it, and they signed it without a single word by any single Cypriot. The problem with the constitution was that it said, in case any of the minorities had an issue, they would have their country come in and save them. So in case the Turkish Cypriots were in pain or struggling in any way, Turkey would come in and save the day, and the same would happen for the Greek Cypriots with Greece. That's a huge problem. As you know, with the Cold War, a lot of the area was very unstable. There was a military group that had a dictatorship in Greece from 1963 until 1974, and they thought, you know what, we want Cyprus. So we're going to send a military group to overthrow the government, and Cyprus will be ours. From 1963 to 1974, there were a lot of fights between the communities. The moment you're divided, it's hard to see what's common in between you. You forget the things that unite you, and you're trying to create a community based on hatred and division. So it was a really tough time for the population, and they did not see the signals of what was about to happen. On the 15th of July 1974, there was a coup. They overthrew the government. The Greek military overthrew the Cypriot government. And on the 20th of July, 5 days later, based on the constitution, Turkey could come in and save the day. If we were to flash back 100 years, Turkey already had a plan to conquer the island at one point. They were just looking for the best time to do so. And that was it. That was a perfect opportunity for them to come in, and they took around 40% of the island. So the issue with that, going forward, is that they never left. They did not just come in to save the day, they remained. In that process, people were prosecuted, they were removed from their homes for both communities, because what happened was that the Crash, who was the president of the North at the time, said, if you want us to give your people alive, you have to make sure that all the Turkish Cypriots are moving to the north, and that all the Greek Cypriots are moving to the south. And that will be it, or do not expect to see your people again. And it was an easy way to separate the people, simply. That line was divided and controlled, and you could not cross to the other side until 2004. So mothers and fathers that had missed their children for years could not find them because they were not able to cross. And that carries a lot of pain for years. And that still exists to this day. So what's the propaganda that exists today? There's quite a bit of it. So I'll talk a little bit about my story and explain how this has impacted our life today and growing up next to soldiers. As I've told you earlier, I grew up next to the border. I grew up next to soldiers, and I thought that all kids grew up like that. I would actually ride my tricycle and go up to the border, and I could hear kids playing. I was at the thinnest part of the border to the other side, and I could actually hear a school. And I would always ask, why can't I go play with those kids? Because there weren't enough young kids in my neighborhood. They said, you can't. It's the enemy. So in my head, after watching cartoons, the enemy is this monster that's going to come and eat me and kill my family and take everything away. So I said, okay. And then I would ride my tricycle back home. In that process, in the first grade of primary, I received these notebooks. On top they say never forget, and they show images of the other side of the island that are our home that was taken away from us by the enemy. So it creates this idea that you're missing something, that you are betrayed by the government, that you need help, and that we need to figure out a way of uniting the island and getting our homes back. And we had songs and parades, and you name it, we had it all. We felt like that was our destiny as children, to get the island back. And it began like a process of brainwashing. This little notebook says, I don't forget and I fight. Cyprus is my heart. So in case there was a war, that we would all go fight it, because Cyprus was our priority. Not our education, not our family, not our friends, not the sports, nothing that had to do with what a child would have to think about. It had to do with our country at every moment. I have a picture of a village. That was a village where Turkish Cypriots and Greek Cypriots lived in the past. My grandpa and my great-grandpa and my great-grandmother, my entire family is farmers. And they used to go into the little town of the village, and they would set up their little stands, and they would sell tomatoes together with the Turkish Cypriots. So when they needed cucumbers, they knew the Turkish Cypriot had the juiciest cucumbers, so they would go to him. And then the same, we had the best tomatoes, so they would come to us. And we lived together. On the weekends, they would go to each other's houses because food is something that unites us, and they would eat together. People lived together, but they forgot that. With the division and the propaganda, people forgot that. And that created a generation of hatred and a generation of pain. And it's hard to move forward when you don't look at the past to learn from it and be able to know what to change. Other parts of the propaganda is this. So I was lucky, I was in a private school for 4 years. I had a scholarship, and so did my sister. And I had met this young girl. She was a Turkish Cypriot. At the time, I wasn't too sure what a Turkish Cypriot was, because that was not the term that was given to me. I just knew the enemy from the other side. And when I had gone to the school, I didn't speak English, and that was the language that was spoken, because it was a private school and they were trying to prepare us to study in the UK or the US. We both entered the class. We both did not speak English, but we didn't speak the same language. I spoke Greek and she spoke Turkish. And the kids would make fun of us because we couldn't communicate in English the way they could, so we weren't cool enough. But we bonded. We knew that we both couldn't speak it. We couldn't communicate between ourselves, so what would we do? During our breaks, my mom would always pack cucumbers, and I just didn't like them. And she would always have carrots and her sandwich, so we would always do our little exchange. Oh, and hold on, when we had like cake or cookies, you bet that was like the best day to share our food, and that's how we bonded. We became really close friends. And that's when I started slowly understanding where she was from, because we could start speaking. And she said, I live on the other side. And I said, what do you mean? Like, what other side? She said, on the other side. And I said, hold on, like you crossed the border and you live on the other side? And she said, yes. And I got scared. I got scared because I kept telling people in my neighborhood that I had this new friend and I didn't know where she was from. And I kept saying she was a foreigner, when in fact she was a Cypriot like I was. But I just didn't know. because all I knew was that she was meant to be an enemy. We became really good friends, and I started meeting other Turkish Cypriots, and I had realized that we had so much more in common, and their families look like mine, because people look so alike. We're the same. We're the exact same. Our blood DNA is so similar to each other in comparison to ours with Turkey or ours with Greece. But the way I had grown up hadn't taught me that. There was an economic crisis in 2008, as there was everywhere, and they stopped scholarships at the private school. So I had to leave Zubaydah, and I went to public school. I had fallen into a slight depression because of the way the education system is. I was scared. There was a large push for Greek nationalism, and I did not grow up like that. My mom is from Romania, so she was always considered an outsider in Cyprus. And I felt broken. This one day though, my art teacher said, "We're gonna draw Cyprus, and we're gonna draw children from both sides of the island." And I said, "Perfect, this is my chance to draw Zubaydah." I drew myself, my curls on one side, and then I drew Zubaydah on the other side, playing her piano and her dog. She had a beautiful chocolate lab. And I drew her dog, and I said, "I'm done." And the teacher then said something that broke my heart. She said, "Okay, now you need to put an X on these children, because they're the enemy." I said, "This is my friend, I drew my friend. I didn't draw any child, I drew my friend." And she said, "You're not listening to me. You need to put an X. This is a project that's gonna go on this giant board, where we're gonna put X on anything that proves that they are the enemy." I said, "This is my drawing, I've done my part. If you want to put an X on it, put your name on it, because it's not my drawing anymore." And I got suspended from school for 3 days, and it got sent to the Ministry of Education that I don't follow orders, so I was in the blacklist of children that vandalize buildings and that should not be able to apply for certain competitions because they're considered violent. And I'm proud of it. If this is what it means to be violent, let me be violent every single day of my life. And that's just a tiny aspect of what it feels like to be a young teenager in school and the things that you're taught. If I hadn't met Zubaydah at the time I did, I may have been part of this propaganda. I may have thought that this was okay, because it's just all you know. With the rise of everything, of course, we have far-right parties on each side of the island. This is the far-right party of the south, and the beginning of a far-right party in the north. They're pushing for a unification with Greece or Turkey accordingly. And so imagine I'm just standing right here. So I grew up right next to the border, and this is the north. At night, these flags light up. What they say is that it is good to be a Turk. For people that have lost their families and lost their homes in the south, that is a reminder every single night. Every single night when you're out, or even through your window, you can see. And it reminds you of the pain of the ones you've lost and the ones you love. But what we don't mention is that the same pain is the pain that the people in the north lived. Because it's not that the Greek Cypriots just struggled and had pain and they lost their families. So did the Turkish Cypriots. But you won't hear it. You won't hear that in any history book in the south, because they don't want you to know that. It's only you that suffered, and it's only you that went through pain. They didn't lose their children. They caused this. When in reality, that's just not the case. But that's the way to build propaganda. Right now, in the north, because of Erdogan, who's the Turkish president, they've started building a new Islamic flow of education. They're trying to ban every park, every theater that's available, all plays, all music venues. They want to cancel everything and build mosques and force people to be religious. In Cyprus, most people actually are not very religious. We have our official religions, but we don't really follow them. Especially after the war, people became more close-knit and focused on their communities versus focusing on a religion to save them, because they knew that that was just not the case for them anymore. But with this problem, My friend Asin, who I came to the US with and met Christine, her mom fears that she won't be able to return to Cyprus because if she wants to, she will have to abide by these rules and these laws that they're enforcing. That she has to go to the mosque, that she has to dress a certain way, and that she just has to follow the words of a man. So, oppression. But the South won't think about that because they're the enemy. They're the ones that killed our families. They're the ones that oppressed us, and we're the victims. But everyone struggled. More of the propaganda. During our holidays, we hold flags and we celebrate, but we never just hold the Cypriot flag. This flag is what we say is the flag of the Republic of Cyprus. This flag over here is the flag of TRNC, which is the Turkish Republic of Northern Cyprus, so the northern part. And it is not recognized by any other country but Turkey because it's considered an invasion by the human rights legislation. A flag of Turkey and a flag of Greece. Because we can never be independent. We're always so connected to these countries and what they're meant to do for us. We can't be independent. And it's all about the mindset that had been built into us. I will leave that to the side. You can have more questions and ask me about it. It's very complicated, the entire history of the island and how things have come to be. But the question now is do we let it exist like that? Do we let another country to conquer us and rule us again? Or do we fight and cause another war in the area? Currently we're the most, let's say, stabilized country in the region of the Middle East, especially with ISIS moving further west, and the general instability of the region. We're meant to be the most calm part, but that's not really true anymore. We have a resource curse because we found gas in our water, and people like gas. And they like to control things. And we're in trouble. So what do we do? What can I do as Eleni? That was the first thing I thought after I got suspended and I was a huge troublemaker. I joined programs that talked about peace education and conflict resolution. I wanted to meet more people from the other side. I wanted to hear their story. Because a lot of the things I knew that I thought were right and I thought, oh, I was being a peacemaker, were still only part of the story. Because you're only taught so much if you grow up on only one side of the island. So I would ask my friends about their stories and what their lifestyle is like and what we could do. One thing we had done, we had created a unity festival where we brought people that played music together on the buffer zone. We had contacted the UN and had received their approval to use that space. And that was a way to remind people that we have more in common than not. We have music in common. We like music, so why can't we just coexist? No one said that you have to be best friends with everybody in your neighborhood. Are you best friends with everybody in Durham? I doubt it. But you coexist, it's your community. If someone needs something, you make sure that you take care of them, because when you need help, you want them to take care of you. There's a new movement called Cyprus Now, and they're trying to solve the problem. They're trying to raise politicians to take action, to move, and to get things done. We're running out of time because the elders that knew what it was like to live together are dying. Young people are growing up in an entire propaganda. Their entire life is just a lie, but they don't know otherwise. So when it comes to election time, they won't vote the way they should be voting, in the sense that what their future is going to look like. They think that it's going to remain the way it is. It won't. Things won't remain the way they are. But they can't understand that because of the education system. So they're trying to move people to understand, to educate people. They have written books that are bi-communal, which means that they have both parts of history in one book. So what actually happened? Which people actually got killed? So then people would realize that it's not a one-sided story. There are students that are taking the streets asking that Cyprus belongs to the people, that Cyprus belongs to the new generations, but it always comes back down to education. And young people feel hopeless. I felt hopeless. I thought that I would graduate high school, I would just be a waitress, and that would be it. But I had Christine. But what about all other children? What about all of them? So I will have a little plug for Friends Forever. When I had heard about this program, it was different than everything else that I had participated in. Because what usually happens is you participate in a program, you talk about peace, you get excited, you go back home, and that's it. So what happens then? Do we just learn a little bit and then go back home and continue living our daily cycle and hope that the other kids that go into the program learn something more and take action? It's just a really bad cycle, and that's what happens with most programs on the island. What really got me excited about Friends Forever is that is not the case. You are prepared before, I'm sure you know more about the program, but you're prepared before you come to the United States. You start interacting with people from the other sides of the island, and the program does not recruit based on financial ability. So if someone cannot necessarily afford to go, you can have fundraisers, and you can figure things out. It shows you that it's possible for you to figure out a way for you to make it possible for you to attend to this program. And then once you're here, it's about community service. It's less about peace talks and panels and bringing Coffee and Ann and politicians to talk to you, because that's the problem. Instead, you're in the community. You're learning about people that have very simple lives that are having such a big impact. Because if you can impact 5 people in your community, imagine if everyone was doing that. If everyone was impacting 5 people in their community. So it empowers you. And you think about the little things. How can I take care of my island? Does it start with animals? Does it start with the environment? It makes things seem more possible. And you know that you have a community here that will root for you and that will send you letters and tell you you've got this, and that will have your back. So you have an entire team of people that you came here with. You go back to the island and you're ready. You have your projects and it's time to act. And by doing that, people see leaders and they get excited. It's cool. It's cool to be doing something different. And they're like, okay, so how do I join the program? How do I join your group? How can I help you? And it impacts the entire island. The population is a little over 1 million. And the island is the size of Connecticut. It's so easy to impact so many people. And it's a good start. Thank you for listening. And if you have any questions, I'd be more than happy to answer them. And you can always find my email.
Have you been able to reconnect with Zubeda?
Yes. So Zubaida is currently in Sheffield and she's studying, and we keep in touch.
How did you find each other again?
Well, we keep in touch through Facebook. It's the easiest way to communicate. But whenever I'm back in Cyprus and she's back in Cyprus, we usually go out for coffee or for food. It's our favorite thing, coffee and food. Oh my goodness. But yeah, we keep in touch. We talk about our lives and what it's like to be in college and the impact our education had on us and the impact of knowing each other.
Have your parents, what's their experience of your mission and your hopes? How is that with your family?
Yeah, as I said earlier, my entire family is a family of farmers, and my dad would always tell me that it's the politicians. Like, when you see a person, if they're nice to you, you should treat them nicely. And that was something that I lived with, and I lived by for a long time, and I still do. They had supported me when I tried joining these programs. A lot of students are not supported by their parents because it's that fear of what society will say. And at this point, my dad crosses and goes to the north more often. He talks to other farmers, and he's actually part of a movement that's trying to convince the UN to allow them to farm in the UN buffer zone. It's the flattest area and the most fertile area on the island, and it's not used because it's a dead zone. But they were talking, so what if we actually farm this area and we use like the fruits and vegetables for our communities? Because we have homeless people right now, so how do we take care of them? How do we take care of poor communities or elders? So let's farm, because people love, it's their job and it's their hobby and it's something they're passionate about, and it brings them together. And then when they're taking breaks, they can have their coffee and their food. It's a very social thing. But the UN is currently saying no. But he's excited. He sees a future to a certain extent, but they're really depending on us, on the younger people.
I was just, and also her mother's from Romania.
Okay.
I don't know if you heard that when you
Uh-huh.
came in, but so that kind of made her the UN forces.
The UN forces change all the time. We have the French that have a little part of theirs.
Do they have all these places, those new ones coming in, or those in the UN buffer zone, or those?
No, they're not. So what happens is that they pay the government
Right. That
a
also
certain amount of
sells.
money, yes, and then they come in, saying that they will help their region. And because it's really our only way of getting money is through tourism, it's a really easy way for the government to get money. And it's really difficult to say no to all these countries that really help you with the peace talks.
And do they fly over there?
Yes, they do. So the first time, I think Cyprus was in the news, in the Euronews, after we entered the EU. The first time we were officially part of the European Union was in 2004. But the first time you actually saw Cyprus, and the title was when they were trying to bomb ISIS. So they said, we're using our Cyprus bases. That was the first time they talked about Cyprus.
Is the British occupied areas, do you have to go through like a passport check and everything?
You're not allowed to enter.
Nobody can enter.
You can't enter
Hmm.
unless you're a British citizen, and even then, you cannot enter. It's the UK.
Highway passes right through one of the British bases near England.
And that was after a legal agreement, but you can't enter the actual bases. It's just because there was no other way of going around it because of the landscape. It was the only way we could have a highway there. Otherwise, it would be too dangerous and would affect farming. So they agreed to that so that they're the good guys.
So your work at Smith now, right? So how does, like, I'm going to sit up for like 1 second, but did you talk about what's the role of women's rights in Cyprus?
Yes. Being at Smith, there's a lot of things I learned this year, and I feel like I grew and ungrew and grew again so many times, and I learned and relearned. I grew up not thinking that I was living in a dictatorship or an authoritarian regime, because under general rules, we have a democracy. But I hadn't thought of Cyprus as a country that had fake news. And only recently did we start learning about women getting abused, or women getting killed, or serial killers that were very interested in killing women, or in killing their children, or generally all these issues that affect women. And it's like, wow, did they just appear? Is that what you're telling us? But that's not the case. It's just all these cases were filed away. Being a Smith student and learning more about women's issues and women's rights, there's a lot of things that have popped up. I realized that women don't necessarily do sports because they're too manly and you have to look a certain way. Otherwise, how are you going to find a husband? How are you going to have a family if you're playing basketball and you're wearing sports shoes? Where are your sandals? Where are your dresses? The other thing is that as a kid, girls shouldn't play with mud. You're going to get dirty. So if somebody comes, they can't see your hands be dirty. You have to be clean and tidy all the time. But you don't understand the impact that this has on your development until you come to a space like this, and particularly Smith, where I talk to people and they're like, yeah, we would play in mud and I did sports for 17 years. And I said, oh wow, it was a big push for me to actually play basketball back home. I really stood out, I was the tomboy, but it made me feel good. I didn't want to be like everybody else to a certain extent. My mom was very supportive of that coming from Romania. She said, you can be whatever you want to be. And it had a big impact on me. But a lot of other women don't have that opportunity. And they don't see past it or through it. Because we're so isolated. The other problem with Cyprus is that we are an island, so we don't have an impact from any other countries as easily as being in the center of the EU or anywhere.
So in the midst of all this military presence, how are Cyprus be able to sustain its tourist culture and economy?
So we avoid discussing the military altogether. It's like it all happens behind closed doors. So what we do show you is this. That's what I had at the end. We show you this. We show you food. The people are very welcoming. We do have a Mediterranean culture. People are ready to take care of you and ready to open up their homes for you. And the island's beautiful, has a natural beauty. And people focus on that because they come by for a week. They drink, they eat, they travel a little bit, they sleep at 3 a.m., wake up at 12. The days go by and they're gone. They spend their money on the island, next year again.
You ever see, well, unless you actually cross the line,
Yeah.
and then they're there.
Or at the airport, I've seen them at the airport.
Yeah. Then, but, you know, like the Brits, you know, you see the Union Jack,
Mhm.
but that's really all you see unless some other entry point. The tourist facilities are, you know, Roman ruins, and they're very nicely laid out. There's some medieval, you know, castles.
Yeah, we were colonized for so long, and architecture had an impact on the island, and you will see a lot of different beautiful things from things that were left behind. And tourists look at those. They don't, when you're on a holiday, you don't want to think about the struggles of an island. You look at the beauties, and you take a picture, you post it on Facebook, you said, look at Cyprus. So if it wouldn't be as fun to post, look at this military base, think about the people here.
What are the struggles that you have? Like, is there like, you talk a little bit about homelessness, but is there anything like?
So right now, there's an increase in drugs. The suicide rates are going up. They're not going on the news, but I started increasing in young people my age committing suicide. And it's something we don't want to talk about because the Orthodox Church, at least in the South, wants to control this media, so sugarcoats everything and everything seems nice. Not just about suicide rates because it's a sensitive issue, but about homelessness. So you will hear a lot of Cypriots saying, we don't have homeless people in Cyprus. Hold on one second. That's a big issue. We have homeless people. There's gang activity that's rising up. With what's happening in the general economic area, the traditional jobs that men had do not exist anymore. They can't just start building cars all the time and building more houses. We've had enough. You can't have any more of that infrastructure. And the jobs that exist are more caretaking ones, and they don't want to lose their machoism. They feel neglected. They feel like they're on the side, so they join far-right groups. They join groups that vandalize and that create tension in areas, including gang groups. Gang groups are not the same as they are in the U.S. yet, but if no one takes care of them, who knows? So it's young kids that, at the age of 12, start smoking, drinking. Drinking is a big problem, especially amongst young women. We have the highest rates of drinking in underage women out of all the European Union. The other issues we're facing are environmental. We have the most trash out of the entire EU, which doesn't make sense. Most of our food should be produce because we have potatoes and tomatoes. That's our main food, but we package things so much without thinking about the future and what we're going to do with all this trash. So now we don't have space to put that away. And because of the way the education system is to just tell you to not forget and to not forget, people are not learning how to be resourceful, how to create a lifestyle that's better for the environment and for their communities. And instead we're stuck. We're literally stuck. And we're facing all these problems and no one's addressing them. Because it's not fun and it's not popular. So instead what they're doing, they're saying, we're having a new casino, which is what's happening. Or we will have a new port, so it's going to be pretty and fun. And China is funding it.
Where does the refugee population and other cultures that may be migrating to the island or moving through fit in to what's happening there?
So what's happening is that most of those refugees don't stay on the island. If we're talking about refugees coming from Syria, because we're not providing as much for them as any other country in the EU, so they usually don't even stop by Cyprus, and if they do, they try to move forward and move to Germany. They receive information as if they are meant to just store it, and then they don't know what to do with it. Because our education system does not teach us what to do with information. It's just like, okay, so you need to know all these dates, you need to know all these names of all the people that died, all these dates for wars. This is our history. We just constantly learn war dates, war names, and war weapons. And you learn all this information, you're like, okay, now what? So that's what happens. And then people either return to the island or stay where they are, and they can't find jobs. Because that's not how education works. It's not what you learn is what you apply. And you definitely know that. But that's the expectation. Because we have everything ready served for us. After being colonized, we're just so ready for people to take care of us and solve our problems and solve the day, save the day. And it's an issue.
So, do you have groups on the two sides who are thinking beyond Turkey and Greece and working to bring about unity between the two regions? Are those groups active and are they operating?
They are active to a certain extent. I think their approach, like I said earlier, about having politicians talk to people and the traditional ways of solving problems is part of the problem. So we're not really moving forward. We're gathering, we manage to gather people, and then we disappoint them by what we present, and then less and less people stick by these movements. So that's what's happening. There are groups that are trying, but it's just changing fundamentally the idea of what peace means and the way of getting there.
Eleni, maybe you can talk about some of the, well, I'm thinking of the coffee club in particular. I mean, because I know there are a lot of people that are very interested in bringing people together and that are looking for opportunities to make that happen. So there's good news.
There are definitely, I was going to
There's a
close
lot
the
of
circle with good news.
to affect change.
Yeah, so there are two main ways of people coming together. Initially, we have the coffee club,
Right.
which is at this old center. That's where shepherds would stop by overnight from moving to city, and they would park their sheep downstairs, and they would sleep overnight and move. But right now, it's more of a coffee club, and people sit and they discuss about their daily lives from both sides of the island. They don't really mention political issues all the time,
They do.
although Cypriots do love talking about politics, but they're not going to sit and talk about how to solve the problem. They will talk about the problem.
They shared their personal stories.
Yes.
Because a lot of them are older and were experiencing this when they were children in 74. But even before that, some of them, they're older people.
And the coffee club mainly attracts older people. There are young people that go and discuss with them, but that's not as often as they would like, for sure. And then your second option in the buffer zone is this thing called the Home for Cooperation. And it's the only building that exists and is run by Cypriots in the buffer zone, because everything else is run by the United Nations. And what that place does is that it brings people together to talk over coffee or food. It also houses some bi-communal organizations. I don't know if you know Peace Players International. It brings young people together to play basketball and remind them that they have this thing in common, and we have more things in common, and more things unite us than what divide us. And
There's the music festival, and, right, with the Buffer Fringe.
so those are all run by the Home for Cooperation. So this home is more like an organizer. It helps give a home to all these organizations that are trying to make a difference and have a space for people to meet. It's again it's limited by what the UN allows. So even music festivals, they have to petition every time to have them run. Yes.
But so if we did Friends Forever there,
When we do things.
when we do Friends Forever there, they'll be able to travel though through the border to visit each other's
Yes,
sites.
absolutely.
Like they
So
won't just have to be in the buffer zone.
I am able to cross to the other side since 2004 with my passport or ID. It used to be a little more complicated before 2016, and I had to get a signature, make sure my mom had signed it, and then cross to the other side, make sure I don't lose that piece of paper. If I lose it and I'm on the wrong side, if I'm a Turkish Cypriot and I'm in the south, I have to make sure I have that white paper on the same for the other side. If not, you're trying to call the police, there's no cell service because you can't call. You can call anywhere in the world, but you cannot call the other side that's like a mile away from you. So you would try to call the police to get your mom to sign that piece of paper. It's a little easier now after the election of a new president in the north. He was very excited to bring on about peace. But again, I think the traditional tactics of how to bring peace and reconciliation did not work. He's tired, and his entire government is tired, so we're stuck again, which is what happens.
So I mean, you talk about fake news. Now, how open is the country in relation to the internet, Googles, and people getting information from the outside?
We're not China. We're not. So that's a good point to make, and thank you for asking. We're not like China. Things are not controlled. But what happens is that people don't care. They're not going to look at outside sources. They're not going to look about what's happening in the rest of the world because they go on Facebook so that they can post the picture from Friday night when they went out to the club and post it, because the entire lifestyle has turned to drinking, social life, and outfits. What am I going to buy? How much more trash am I going to have? And people are focusing on these main three things. So there's no will to look about something or to research something. People, to this day, what the University of Cyprus is facing is that people don't know how to do research. People that have completed their undergrad and are going to their graduate school program in Cyprus, they use Wikipedia as a source or a blog as a source because they don't know. They don't understand that that's not research, and that if you saw something in a far-right webpage, it doesn't mean it's fact because it's there. The internet is not your Bible. It's just your gateway to more information. It could be right, it could be wrong. But people don't necessarily process that. You're not going to believe the things I see people sharing. They had shared a picture from 1930, and they said, look at what happened yesterday. I can't even remember what it was, but I said, are you kidding me? Like, it was like this really popular picture of a ship, and there was a story next to it, and it just drove me crazy. But that's the reality of Cyprus right now. The way the education system is from the age of 3 is so corrupt, and it's such a big issue that it's not letting you grow. So really, even the generation that is the one that I'm in, I'm worried. I don't know who's going to run to be a politician. And even if I was to do so, I don't know how I would be able to attract these people without having to lie to them in order for them to change their mindset. I'm trying to figure out how to be a leader for these people. Because I can't force somebody to think a certain way. But can I bring an organization that will start helping me and be the backbone of a change? A team is better than one.
What effect did on two sides, Greek and Turkish, by their home governments, let's say, Turkey and Athens?
So Greece is not doing very well economically, and Greece has not been interested in Cyprus for years. The only time they really were was during the dictatorship, but they don't want Cyprus because they know it will be a larger cost for them than any benefit. Their islands are doing better when it comes to tourism than what Cyprus is doing, and they're truly just not interested in their way of thinking. Where the poor Greek civilization, because you speak a dialect, we don't speak proper Greek. So when we do speak our dialect, they start laughing, and they're like, ha ha ha, what is this that you're saying? So they're not really interested in us, and they're not really having a strong impact. We do have diplomatic relations with them, just because they are part of our region and of our history. But it's not necessarily the same case with Turkey, because the way this history is taught in Turkey, they teach in schools that Cyprus is a Turkish island. the entirety of Cyprus. And they also have a couple of myths that Cyprus used to be part of Turkey, and then there was an earthquake, and then it became Cyprus. So by tradition, Cyprus belongs to Turkey. And Turkey long-term just really wants Cyprus. It was in their plan in I don't want to destroy dates, but I think it was 1920 when the official paper of we want to conquer this entire island. It was right before the Ottoman Empire became Turkey in 1922. They wanted the entirety of the island, and they only have 40% right now. So if a chance was given to them to take the rest of the island, who says they wouldn't?
Yeah, Turkey is definitely looking at the long-term plan, and there's big growth in Cyprus has been slow but steady. They're created incentives for people from Turkey to move to the north part of Cyprus. So the Turkish Cypriots are becoming a minority in the north. So their voice is getting diluted in what?
And it's a political tactic to overflow the north with Turkish citizens that feel more Turkish than Cypriot. Because if we're continuing the peace talks that are not really moving anywhere, in 10 years, you won't be talking to a Cypriot, you'll be talking to a Turk that feels Turkish.
Right.
And you can't make them feel different. If they feel Turkish and they feel like where they live is Turkey, that's it.
And
So
when
they're
she-
settling.
Right, and so when she says that young people are leaving the island, it's more Turkish Cypriots than,
It's the same numbers. It feels like it's more because there's a smaller number of Turkish Cypriots. So the difference is that less Turkish Cypriots are returning back because of how oppressed they are in the north and the very few opportunities that exist. Because what's happening is that Turkey is having companies in the north, but they're only hiring people that are willing to let go of their Cypriot identity and only have a Turkish passport.
right. And so I hosted in 2011 a young man whose father, his company is there, do construction and engineering, and they actually designed and built the airport in the north, and they're not getting government contracts anymore. Because they're Turkish Cypriot, they're giving the contracts to the people that have come from Turkey. And when the Turkey invests in the north by building mosques and religious schools that Turkish Cypriots do not have access to.
And if the Turkish Cypriots say no, the only way that the Turkish Cypriots get clean water is from Turkey, because we don't have the infrastructure to clean the seawater. It's too expensive. So if they disagree and say we're not going to follow what Turkey is saying, they will cut the water that they use, and it won't make life livable.
The woman who hosted us, when we stayed there, said we'll have to get along with the South because we'll need to move there eventually.
Yeah.
So,
That they'll be moving there. So.
That
don't have to, because we have to get along with them because we'll have
Right. And in the south, the Greek Cypriots, because they're recognized by the EU, they have access to a bit more easily.
So Cypriots in the entirety are recognized by the EU, but when it comes to geographic location, only the south is recognized because it's the representation of the Republic of Cyprus. But every Turkish Cypriot has the same rights to the EU as a Greek Cypriot. And they have made efforts to support Turkish Cypriots more by offering more scholarships for them for colleges in order to give them an opportunity to leave the oppression. But unless Cyprus decides to solve this problem, the EU can only do so much. I would like to end this like on a positive note.
And then we can do questions from people afterwards.
Yes, absolutely.
Yeah.
To end this on a positive note, there are a lot of movements to create a federation, so the United States of Cyprus. What that would mean is that it would help the populations not have to move again, be able to rule themselves and create their state governance, but then be run by one federal united government. And it might be the easiest solution right now versus uniting the island all together and trying to figure out language, religion, property, which is the most difficult issue. Or the other solution is a two-state government, so two separate states. I think that long-term that might be unsafe for the north because Turkey might invade the north. Because of how small it is, versus us being one strong united island and using our resources in a better and more smart way. young people are out there. There are people working in the UK. I am working here with a few of my friends from all over the world to figure out how we can improve education and help children see their potential outside of grades and outside of an education that really destroys their energy to change the world. And it's a process. And thank you for listening. It really makes a difference. And if you pass this story on, and if you really support this program, and we can try to get Friends Forever on ground, it's a beginning. It's a beginning of a long journey, but it has to happen. Or it has to happen. I'll end it on that positive note.